Hello everyone, welcome back to Upside Down Data. Today I want to talk about whether or not we're still in a bull market from the perspective of the ETH Bitcoin valuation. If you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and follow us on Twitter, where we put out regular updates about our risk indicators and more. So if you've been following the markets today, obviously Bitcoin is not having the greatest run of things right now. We're down about 4% on the day. And I think the question that a lot of people have been asking and kind of wringing their hands about in the market is, are we still in a bull market or are we in a bear market? That's kind of the question of the day. And there seems to be pretty vocal opinions on both sides. Some people who say, yes, we're definitely still in a bull market. Some people saying, no, we're definitely in a bear market. We're destined to go way lower. And people talk about a lot of different metrics and different indicators as evidence for their given perspectives. I want to spend a little bit of time today, though, talking about one that not as many people have been talking about, at least in the terms of how I think it can give us some information about whether or not we might still be in a bull or a bear market. And that is the ETH Bitcoin valuation. So this is something that a lot of people watch. It's basically an indicator of relative outperformance between Bitcoin and Ethereum, or I should say Ethereum and Bitcoin. So essentially it's just the price of Ethereum divided by the price of Bitcoin. And so what you end up getting over here is basically what percentage of a Bitcoin is one ETH worth, or what proportion of one Bitcoin is one ETH worth. And so essentially the way you can read this chart is that when it's in an uptrend, that means that Ethereum is outperforming relative to Bitcoin. Ethereum is becoming worth more and more of one ETH is becoming worth more and more of one Bitcoin. And then in downtrends, those are times when Bitcoin is outperforming Ethereum. And one of the things that you can glean from this is an idea of kind of market sentiment, of kind of risk on versus risk off. So obviously more recently, Ethereum has been kind of shifting more and more in the way people perceive it. It's a little bit less of a risk asset than Bitcoin, though I think most people would argue that Bitcoin is still the safest, quote unquote, crypto, probably the most shielded from downside of all volatile crypto assets, excluding stable coins. And ETH is kind of getting towards that point, but it's still considered a little bit more risky. But these are two of the largest, the two largest cap crypto assets. So looking at their relative valuations is interesting and gives them information. And the information I think that we can glean from a more macro perspective is getting an idea of, are we in a bull or a bear market in some ways? Basically, is the market willing to take on excess risk besides just sticking in Bitcoin, or is the market kind of fleeing into Bitcoin? Obviously you could look at Bitcoin dominance as another way of looking at this, but I'm just going to focus on the ETH Bitcoin valuation here, just because I think it's one that people haven't talked about as much. So what do I mean about using this to kind of gauge if we're in a bull or a bear market? Well, I think we can kind of get a better idea if I just show this top and bottom comparison between, on the top, the ETHBTC valuation, and this is on the weekly chart, and then just the Bitcoin chart here on the bottom being on the weekly as well. And so you can see that in periods where Bitcoin, and then the broader crypto market as a whole, has been in a bull market, we can see that oftentimes those are the times when Ethereum will outperform relative to Bitcoin. When there's a bull market in the crypto space, like the big run we saw in 2017 going into early 2018, that tends to be times when Ethereum, and frankly other more risky crypto assets, will outperform relative to Bitcoin, or will have their moments where they really outperform Bitcoin. And then in bear markets, like what we got off of that top going down to this final capitulation in December, that's when you'll see the ETH Bitcoin valuation in a downtrend going down. That suggests that people are fleeing from the more risky parts of the crypto markets and are staying more in Bitcoin, right? They're leaving more of their funds in Bitcoin. They're kind of fleeing the more risky parts of the market. So you'll see these downtrends where Ethereum, and frankly other riskier crypto assets as well, will be in a downtrend relative to Bitcoin. Now, obviously, you can look at this run that we had in 2019 and say, well, wait a minute, there was a downtrend in the ETHBTC valuation here as well. Well, one of the ways you can interpret that is that even though Bitcoin had a nice run here, the breadth of that bull market was not like what we've seen in the past, right? Usually, when you get a full-on bull market, you're not only getting Bitcoin rallying, but you're also getting other altcoins rallying as well, or at least keeping up with Bitcoin or outperforming Bitcoin. We didn't see that in 2019, which actually could have been a warning sign that that was not a very healthy bull market. The idea being that if you want to have a full-on bull market, you want not just Bitcoin to do well, you actually want the whole market to be rising. That's an indication of a full-on bull market, is people are just throwing money into the space kind of willy-nilly and are willing to take on excess risk. If it's just Bitcoin running on its own, it might not be as healthy. And that's actually what we saw, where we then came down and corrected into ultimately the March 2020 crash here. And then as we went back into this bull run as well, the ETHBTC valuation was in a constant uptrend, right? You know, setting in consistently higher highs and higher lows as we went till this final run up that we had here in May of 21, where Ethereum kind of put in its top quite a bit later than Bitcoin put in its top. But what's interesting about where we are right now is that we're still in an uptrend on the ETHBTC valuation, right? We're not in this downtrend that we've seen marking bear markets in the past. We're actually seeing Ethereum continue to make its moves up. So what might that mean? Well, if history is any indication, when the ETHBTC valuation behaves like this, this is more indicative of a bull market than a bear market, right? So, you know, ignoring kind of today's volatility with Bitcoin, that ultimately really doesn't matter. If we just zoom out and look at the more macro picture, we're still in this kind of macro uptrend on the ETHBTC valuation. We're putting in consistently higher highs and higher lows. So that might be one point for the bulls. The people who are calling the crypto market and saying that we're in a bull market still, at least from the ETHBTC valuation, that does seem to still be the case. Now, obviously, this is just one indicator in the space, but I do think it's an interesting one to look at, and it can give us some information. So if the ETHBTC valuation is at least somewhat useful for gauging kind of bull market structure or health or kind of the breadth of a bull market, I think it's also interesting then to start applying some of our machine learning models that we have here on the channel to the ETHBTC valuation and get an idea of what these models are saying, what these perspectives we can glean from these models. So I'm showing you here the trend confidence indicator for ETHBTC, and I have this zoomed in just since beginning of 2021, just so we can see what's going on a little bit more clearly here. What the TCI does is it basically tells us how confident we can be in a given trend. So if we're in an uptrend and the TCI is above 0, it's in the green zone, that means that uptrend, we can be confident in it, that it might have legs. If you're in an uptrend and the TCI is red, however, that's bearish. That's bad. That means that the uptrend is likely over or near its end, and then a reversal is very conceivable or likely. So basically 0 is that critical line. And you see how this has worked in the past, right? You know, you can see, you know, that with this uptrend that we had, you know, going into the later part of the bull run in the spring of 21, we can see the TCI flipped green pretty low down as Ethereum went on that run, suggesting at the time that, you know, it's second to turn green, that this might be that point where Ethereum is going to put in its big move against Bitcoin in that particular bull run. And that's exactly what ended up happening. And then it confirmed quite quickly that period of outperformance was coming to an end. And indeed, then we had kind of a more bearish period, short-term bearish period for the ETHBTC valuation. But then the TCI flipped green, we had an uptrend, flipped red, we had a downtrend, flipped green, we had an uptrend, flipped red, we had this more recent downtrend coming out of November. And now you can see TCI is actually flipped green again coming out of this point here, suggesting it thinks that the ETHBTC valuation is more in an uptrend, or it looks like it's an uptrend, and we can still be confident in that uptrend, relatively confident in that uptrend right now. It looks more like an uptrend than a downtrend. And what's nice about this model is you can actually probe it and ask it what specific level it's watching as being that dividing line between being kind of bullish or bearish on, in this case, this uptrend. And that's at 6.77% right now, which essentially is just, you know, ETH needs to stay above being 6.77% of one ETH needs to be staying above being 6.77% of one Bitcoin for it to stay bullish on it. If it falls below this level, it'll flip bearish. Or if you do it in a proportion, it'll be 0.0677 is that key level. So right now, it still thinks that we're in an uptrend in the more local kind of term. And so if we're kind of hoping for a continuation of this bullish structure with ETHBTC, with it continuing to put in higher highs and higher lows, you know, we'd like to be seeing this uptrend right now, you know, put in a high, put in a higher low. We then have a green flip to go and put in a higher high, flip back to red to put in a higher low. we now like to see this continue, this kind of flip back to green, put in a higher high again with the ETHBTC valuation before we go and flip back red, potentially to put it in that higher low. So far, the structure has held up. And we'll have to see if that continues, but this is exactly kind of the schedule that we'd be looking for. You know, green, red, green, red, green, red, all the while putting in higher highs and higher lows. So far, so good from that perspective. Now, the other indicator that we can look at is our risk indicator, the upside downside potential indicator, and we can actually apply this to the ETHBTC valuation, and I think it gives some interesting insight. You'll notice that it tends to do a pretty good job, right? We can see it gets into these high risk zones. So this is the ETHBTC valuation across time. The UDPI gets into these high risk zones at tops of the ETHBTC valuation, and then down to the green zone in these bottoming points, these kind of, you could consider this accumulation zones where flipping into ETH out of Bitcoin has been advantageous because then Ethereum outperforms Bitcoin. And these red points where flipping off of ETH back into Bitcoin have been advantageous because those are the points where, at least in the coming kind of months, where Bitcoin has outperformed ETH. And you can see that we've recently put in a green reading down here, suggesting that this is, from the model's perspective, a point at which the ETHBTC valuation is relatively low risk, suggesting that ETH has a lot more room to run against Bitcoin than Bitcoin has room to run against ETH. And we can see that if we just look at the UDPI chart across time. Remarkably consistent how this level up here at 4 to 5 has acted as that kind of resistance zone throughout kind of the history of the ETHBTC valuation, or really the history of Ethereum. And we can see right now is that we are at this point below 0, where there's more room for ETH to run against Bitcoin than for Bitcoin to run against ETH, suggesting that we might be able to continue putting in that move up to then set in a higher high again. And the other thing that we can look at as well from this perspective, I've talked about this before with kind of individual assets UDPIs, that a bullish structure with the UDPIs when you're putting in consistently higher lows. And that's what we're seeing for the ETHBTC valuation, that we're kind of overall having these generally increasing lows on it, suggesting that Ethereum is not bleeding against Bitcoin as far as is plausible from the model's perspective every time it comes down, right? It's kind of catching itself before Bitcoin has too much of a run against it, and then ETH comes back up to kind of level the playing field or start outperforming Bitcoin. So again, I think this is a bullish structure on the ETHBTC evaluation. And so from all those different perspectives, I think for now, I'm not seeing anything to worry about on the ETHBTC evaluation in terms of that uptrend. DCI is green, UDPI still has a bullish structure and is still in a relatively low risk zone, even while the ETHBTC valuation's in this kind of uptrend throughout this whole period here. That, I think, is more in favor of the bulls than the bears in that way. And if the ETHBTC valuation gives us some purchase, some idea what's going on in the broader markets, are we in a bull market or bear market, I think that could also be hopeful. Now, of course, we have to caveat all of this with saying that I think, you know, the continuation of a crypto bull market is obviously going to be dependent on broader macro conditions. We're in a high inflation time with a lot of macro uncertainty and risks that exist. So that is obviously a reason for concern. That's separate. That's kind of outside the crypto space. But if none of those kind of events kind of get in the way or interfere, I don't see anything right now that's flashing that we're definitely heading into a bear market soon. Obviously, it's crypto. Anything could happen. But this is just what I'm reading from the ETHBTC valuation. All right, if you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like and follow us on Twitter. And remember, with the TCI and the UDPI, we're all going to make it.